It was the kind of night that made the earth tremble, a night where thunder didn't just roar, it screamed. The rain came like judgment, hard and endless, drowning the cries of a lonely woman by the riverbank. Her clothes were soaked, her body weak, but her eyes still burned with something stronger than pain. In her trembling arms, she held a baby wrapped in a faded cloth, close to her chest, as if the child was the last reason she had left to keep breathing. Behind her, a man's voice echoed through the storm, desperate, angry, broken. He called her name, but the wind devoured his cries. Because the river was louder. That river had seen many things, joy, betrayal, blood. But that night, it was about to take something it could never return. And as lightning flashed across the dark sky, the woman whispered something the storm could barely carry, a farewell that sounded like forgiveness. Then, there was silence. And the river swallowed the truth. They say the river never forgets. And maybe that's why, years later, people still whisper about that night. About the woman who disappeared, and the man who destroyed her life before realizing he'd destroyed himself too. But stories like this, they never begin in thunder. They begin in sunlight, when love still pretends to be kind. Her name was Amma, a girl from the quiet village of Damakram. A place where dreams were small, because poverty made them so. Amma's father had died when she was young. Her mother, Mansa, sold firewood by the roadside just to keep food on their mat. Amma was different. She carried something her mother had lost, hope. Every morning she would walk to the stream barefoot, balancing a basin of cassava on her head and whispering to herself that one day, she'd wear a nurse's uniform and make her mother proud. But in villages like Damakram, hope is fragile. It shines brightly, but it attracts shadows. And Amma's shadow came the day a stranger arrived. He came in a black SUV, windows tinted, arrogance polished. His name was Tetteh, a man from the city who believed everything had a price, even people. He said he came to buy land by the river, to build a resort that would change the village forever. But what he changed wasn't the land. It was Amma's fate. They said she first caught his eye at the stream, bending to wash her clothes as the evening sun painted her skin gold. To Tetteh, she was beauty unspoiled by city noise. To Amma, he was the miracle she'd been praying for, the proof that maybe God hadn't forgotten her after all. And so, he began to visit often. He brought gifts, books, dresses, promises. He spoke gently, smiled often, and looked at her in a way no one ever had. In her heart, she believed him. Because no one had ever told her that love, when mixed with power, can be the most dangerous lie of all. Weeks passed, and the visits grew frequent. He told her stories about the city, of lights that never went out, of hospitals where nurses were treated like angels. He told her she was different, special, destined for more. And in those words, Amma built her dreams again, only this time, she built them around him. When he touched her hand, she didn't pull away. When he whispered her name, she believed it meant forever. But forever ended quietly. One day, he stopped coming. The SUV stopped appearing on the dusty road. And the river, that had once witnessed their laughter, now listened only to her silence. Then came the sickness, the mornings when she couldn't eat, the nights when she wept into her pillow because her body had begun to change. By the time she realized what was happening, it was too late. In small villages, secrets are harder to hide than the wind. By the time Amma found the courage to tell her mother, the village already knew. The same people who had smiled at her now looked at her with disgust. They whispered when she passed. They pointed. They laughed. Her mother wept until her voice broke. Her only daughter, the one she thought would lift their family's name, now a symbol of shame. The man who had promised heaven. He was gone. Back to the city. Back to the comfort of money and lies. Amma waited for him. She sent letters that were never answered. She prayed to a God that stayed silent. And slowly, something inside her began to die. When the child began to move in her belly, Amma felt fear, not joy. Each kick reminded her of betrayal. Each heartbeat inside her carried the echo of a man who no longer remembered her name. Still, she endured. Because love, even when broken, makes fools of the pure-hearted. But the village was unkind. They mocked her swollen belly, called her cursed, a warning to other girls. And yet, despite everything, Amma found a strange peace at the river. She would sit there at dusk, whispering her dreams to the water, as if the river could understand. The same river where she had once met him. The same river that would one day take her. They say the first wound love gives is invisible, it hides behind smiles, behind the hope that things will get better. But for Amma, that wound grew each day, bleeding through her innocence, staining every dream she ever had. What began as love soon became a sentence. And the man who once called her beautiful would soon call her a mistake. This was only the beginning of her fall, and his reckoning. Morning broke softly over the village of Damakram, but Amma no longer woke with the sunrise. Her mornings had become heavier than her nights, burdened with whispers that followed her everywhere she went. The seed inside her belly grew quietly, but around her, noise filled the air. Laughter that wasn't kind, eyes that didn't blink when they stared, mouths that spoke her name only to stain it. She had become a lesson to others, not through her words, but through her pain. A woman's shame is a fire that burns only her, while others warm their hands around it. Amma's mother, Mansa, withdrew into herself. She stopped going to the market. She no longer smiled. Sometimes, in the silence of their small hut, Amma would hear her mother weeping, not for the child Amma carried, but for the dreams she had lost. But life did not pause for sorrow. The rains came, the crops grew, and Damakram moved on, as if the ruin of one girl was nothing more than dust on the road. Far away, in the noise of the city, Tetteh lived a different story. He had forgotten the river, the promises, and the girl who waited by its edge. He wore suits, drove fast cars, laughed loudly, the kind of laughter that tries to drown guilt. To him, Amma was a mistake he had already erased. He told himself she would move on, as if moving on were easy for the poor, the broken, the betrayed. But guilt is like a shadow, it waits. And though Tetteh didn't know it, his shadow had begun to grow longer than his pride. New moon when Amma went into labor, there was no one by her side except her mother and an old midwife who worked for palm oil and blessings. The pain was endless, the room small, the air thick with fear. Outside, thunder rolled again, like the echo of her first meeting with Tetteh. After hours of agony, she brought a child into the world, a boy, small and silent. He did not cry immediately. For a brief, unbearable moment, the silence of that newborn was heavier than the world. Then came a weak, broken wail, thin but alive. Amma's tears mixed with sweat as she held him to her chest. She smiled, even through her pain, because despite everything, love still. Sometimes, even in the ashes of betrayal, life insists on being born. But life born from pain often carries pain within it. Months later, word reached Tetteh that Amma had given birth. At first, he ignored it. But gossip travels quickly, even in cities that pretend not to care. His business partners began to whisper. His mother asked questions. And slowly, the image he had built, the proud man of wealth, began to crack. So, he returned. Not out of love, not out of guilt, but out of pride, the need to control the story before it controlled him. When he arrived in Damakram, the villagers stared. Some saw a savior. Amma saw a ghost. He came bearing gifts, rice, oil, money wrapped in envelopes. He said nothing kind, but everything cold. To him, the child was not a blessing, but proof of a mistake. And Amma was the evidence he wanted to erase. He came not as a man seeking forgiveness, but as a man terrified of shame. Rumor has no mercy when it finds its prey. When Tetteh refused to acknowledge Amma publicly, the village took his silence as truth, that she had deceived him. They mocked her openly now. They called her desperate, shameless, a trapper of men. At the marketplace, women whispered behind her back. Children imitated her swollen walk, laughing as she passed. Even those who once pitied her began to avoid her, afraid her bad fortune might spread like a curse. Amma stopped going outside. Her world shrank to the walls of her mother's hut, and the small mat where her baby slept. Her mother tried to console her, but even she had grown bitter. She blamed Amma, blamed the man, blamed fate. The house became quiet, and every silence between them was a wound that refused to heal. When shame enters a home, it eats more than food, it eats love. Yet even in her pain, Amma found purpose. She refused to abandon her child. She sold vegetables by the roadside, carrying him on her back as she worked. She sang to him softly, not songs of joy, but of survival. Each day she woke up, she chose to live, even when living felt like punishment. And in that quiet defiance, she became something the village didn't expect, strong. Broken, yes, but strong in a way that frightened even the ones who mocked her. The world loves to watch a woman fall, but it trembles when she rises again, even with scars. While Amma rebuilt her strength, Tetteh's life in the city began to crumble. The resort project he boasted about collapsed. Investors pulled out. His accounts ran dry. His name, once respected, became a whisper in business circles. And in his dreams, he began to see her, standing by the river, holding the child, silent, but accusing. He would wake up sweating, trembling, hearing the sound of the river in his ears even though he was miles away from it. His new life began to rot from the inside. A man may run from the truth, but truth has many legs, and guilt, the longest of all. One evening, months after his business collapsed, Tetteh returned to the village again. He came quietly this time, no car, no gifts, no pride. But Amma refused to see him. Her mother sent him away. The villagers watched, half in pity, half in satisfaction. The man who once brought wealth now brought only shame. He walked to the river, the place where it all began. There, he stood for hours, staring at his reflection. And for the first time, he didn't see a successful man. He saw a coward. In that reflection, he met the ghost of his own choices. But it was too late. Some ghosts forgive. Amma's did not. Back in her hut, Amma rocked her child to sleep as rain began to fall outside. She listened to the thunder and wondered if the sky cried for women like her, women who loved too deeply, trusted too easily, and paid too dearly. And somewhere beyond that rain, Tetteh sat in his car, staring at the road that led back to the city, and realizing he had nothing left to return to. He had taken her innocence and left her with a burden. But life has a way of balancing scales, slowly, painfully, but always. Amma carried his seed in her womb. And now, she carried his guilt in her silence. What she didn't know, was that the same silence would one day become her final cry. And for Tetteh, the beginning of madness. The dry season came with dust and sorrow. The river shrank, and so did Amma's hope. Her child, the boy she had named Kojo, began to fall ill. First, it was a fever. Then came the cough, the weakness, the nights of restless crying. Amma sold everything she could, her mother's wrapper, her own clothes, the little jewelry she once wore with pride, just to buy medicine. But the medicine didn't work. The fever grew. In the evenings, she would sit by the window, fanning him gently, praying to a God who seemed to be watching in silence. When the body of a child weakens, the soul of a mother breaks. Yet even in breaking, she does not stop loving. Amma's mother aged rapidly. She no longer scolded, no longer spoke of shame, only of survival. Every breath Kojo took became a thread pulling their hearts between fear and faith. But in the corner of her mind, Amma knew the truth. The child she bore in pain was slowly being taken from her by the same world that once mocked her for carrying him. Far away, in a lonely apartment in the city, Tetteh could no longer sleep. The success that once filled his days had vanished, leaving him with nothing but silence, a silence too loud for peace. Each night, when he closed his eyes, he saw her. Amma by the river, her dress soaked in rain. Sometimes, she was silent. Sometimes, she whispered his name in the dark. And behind her, a child cried, the kind of cry that doesn't belong to life, but to memory. He woke each morning drenched in sweat, his heart pounding as if trying to escape his own chest. He tried to drown the visions with alcohol, with laughter, with women, but guilt is a ghost that drinks what you drink, and he had mocked her tears. Now he tasted their salt every night. One afternoon, Tetteh's mother visited him. She looked around his once proud home and saw what he had become, a man haunted, lost, hollow. She said nothing, but her silence spoke loudly. Mothers know when their sons are at war with their own souls. After she left, Tetteh stared at his reflection in the mirror. His eyes were bloodshot, his face sunken. The man staring back was not powerful, he was guilty. He began to withdraw from everyone. Friends called him, he ignored them. His company fell apart, his accounts froze. And soon, he found himself alone with the only thing that refused to leave him, There are prisons built of walls. And there are prisons built of memory. Tetteh was serving a sentence only truth could end. Amma's struggle deepened. The villagers still whispered, but pity had replaced mockery. They watched as she carried her sick child through the dusty road to the herbalist's hut, her feet swollen, her strength fading. The herbalist looked at her with tired eyes, the kind of eyes that had seen too many mothers arrive too late. He gave her herbs and hope in the same breath, but both were bitter. Night after night, Amma held her child close, feeling his small heart beat slower than before. She sang to him, not to make him sleep, but to remind herself that he was still alive. Sometimes, love becomes a form of waiting. Waiting for a miracle, or for the pain to stop. One evening, Amma found an old paper and began to write a letter. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Maybe to God, maybe to the man who ruined her life. In that letter, she wrote of dreams, the ones she once had. The ones she had buried, and the one that refused to die, that her son would live. She wrote until her tears blurred the ink, until words became stains. Then she folded it carefully and hid it under her mat. The heart has ways of speaking that the world will never hear. In the city, Tetteh began to hear things. At first, it was just whispers, the sound of water in his ears when none was around. Then came the crying of a baby, faint but persistent. Sometimes he'd wake up to find his windows open, rain dripping on the floor, though the night had been clear. He stopped answering calls. Neighbors said they could hear him shouting in his sleep, begging for forgiveness. But forgiveness, like peace, must be earned. The sins we hide do not die. They grow roots in the dark and bloom when we least expect. Then came the day the river went silent. Amma knew it before the doctor said a word. Kojo's small body had stopped fighting. The air felt heavy, the world smaller. Her hands trembled as she held him one last time, still, weightless, gone. Her mother screamed, but Amma did not. She sat still, like stone, her eyes empty. Tears had become a luxury she could no longer afford. That night, the entire village gathered outside her hut. No one spoke. The sound of mourning filled the air. There are cries the heavens remember. Cries that pierce through clouds. That make even the stars weep. That night, the sky did not shine over Damacram. In the city, Tetteh woke with a start. He felt something break inside him, a sharp pain that wasn't physical. He didn't know why, but he felt it, the loss. That same night, he packed his things and drove back to the village under a sky swollen with rain. When he arrived, people stared in silence. They didn't need to speak, he could read the truth in their eyes. Amma's child was gone, the same child he had refused to acknowledge. He walked to the small grave behind her hut and fell to his knees. The rain poured over him as if the heavens themselves refused to let him stand. For the first time in years, Tetteh cried. Not out of pity. Out of something deeper, the realization that he had destroyed the only soul that ever loved him without reason. He built empires from deceit and wealth from pain. But the foundation of every lie is dust. And dust always returns to the ground. Amma no longer spoke to anyone. She wandered between the trees near the river, her hair untied, her eyes distant. People said she had lost her mind. But the truth was simpler, she had lost her reason to stay. Each day, she walked closer to the river. Each night, she stared at its dark surface as if waiting for it to speak. And in the city, Tetteh sold everything. He gave away his car, his land, his pride. He lived like a man waiting for. He had all the money the world could offer. But the one thing he could not buy was peace. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Tetteh stood by the river once more. On the opposite bank, he thought he saw her, Amma, standing still, the wind playing with her dress. He blinked. She was gone. He called out her name into the wind, but only the river answered. That night, both the villagers and the city newspapers would speak of strange happenings near the river, of footsteps leading to the edge but none returning. The weight of guilt is heavier than any stone. It drags the body, drowns the spirit, and silences the heart. Some say Tetteh never left that river. Others say he went mad wandering along its banks, calling the names of the dead. But one thing is certain. The morning sky hung low over Damacram. Gray clouds pressed against the horizon, heavy with the weight of coming rain. The villagers said the heavens had grown tired of watching, tired of silence. By the riverbank, where reeds bent with the wind, a woman walked barefoot, her white cloth clinging to her thin frame. It was Amma, but she was not the Amma they once knew. Her face, once bright with laughter, now carried a faraway calm. Her eyes, once filled with dreams, now reflected only the stillness of the river. No one knew what she came to see every dawn, standing there for hours, whispering. They said the river spoke to her. Not in words, but in memories. Far away in the city, Tetteh was no longer the man he used to be. He lived alone, in a small rented room, no servants, no cars, no laughter. He spent his nights staring at the ceiling, hearing echoes of the child's cry that never left his mind. People said his business had crumbled, his friends had abandoned him, and his sanity was hanging by a thread. But Tetteh didn't care. There was only one thing left for him to do, to return to the village. And so, one morning, he packed a single bag, boarded a rickety bus, and began the long journey back to Damakram, the place where his sins had begun. Every road that leads home is paved with regret. Some walk it for peace. Others walk it for punishment. When Tetteh arrived, the village was quiet. Children stopped playing. Women stared from their doorways. Everyone recognized him, the man who had once promised, and destroyed. He asked where Amma was. No one answered. They only pointed toward the river. He followed the narrow path until he saw her, standing by the same water where they had first met, years ago. Her hair was loose, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held a small folded paper, the letter she had written long ago. He called her name softly. She didn't turn. He called again, louder this time. Still, she stood silent. Then, slowly, she turned to him. And for the first time in years, their eyes met. There were no words, only the sound of rushing water between them. Some apologies cannot be spoken. They live in the eyes. In the tears we can't shed. Tetteh fell to his knees in the wet mud. His voice broke as he spoke, of guilt, of pain, of nights haunted by what he had done. He begged her forgiveness. He promised to make things right, even though he knew he never could. Amma listened without blinking. Then, in a voice softer than the wind, she whispered only one thing. The river knows. And with that, she turned back to the water, unfolding the letter in her hand. It was old, the ink faded, the paper nearly torn apart by time. She let it go. The wind caught it, and the letter drifted onto the river's surface, floating away like a memory that had waited too long. In that moment, he understood. Forgiveness was not his to receive. It belonged to the river now. As the storm gathered, lightning flashed across the sky. The first drops of rain fell on the river, breaking its surface into trembling circles. Tetteh reached out his hand toward Amma, calling her name again. She took one step forward into the water. Then another. By the time he realized what she was doing, it was too late. The current swallowed her white cloth, her figure fading beneath the gray waves. He screamed, not in anger, but in horror, in love, in loss. He jumped in after her, but the current was merciless. Both disappeared into the storm. The villagers who rushed to the river later that evening found only the folded letter. And so the river claimed them both. One out of sorrow, the other out of guilt. Days passed. The storm ended. The river grew calm again. Fishermen said that sometimes, at dusk, they saw two shadows moving under the water, one leading, one following. Children were told never to go near that part of the river, for it belonged to souls that had unfinished stories. Tetteh's house in the city was later sold. Amma's hut remained empty, her mother having died of grief soon after. But their tale lived on, whispered from one generation to the next. They said the river remembers. Not to punish, but to remind, that every life we touch leaves a ripple. And every cruelty we commit returns to us. Carried by the tide of time. In the story of Amma and Tetteh, there are no heroes. Only lessons. Lessons about pride, about conscience. And about the kind of love that dies because it was never protected. He maltreated the village girl after impregnating her. A true reflection of how power, when abused, destroys the innocent. Let this story remind us, love is not ownership. Responsibility is not charity. And conscience never forgets. The river remembers, even when the world forgets.